Alright, for today's critical thought, we're going to be talking about what it means to add multiplayer to a video game and the considerations that go into balancing both single and multiplayer options within a single title. Now, I'm still coming off of my cold, so there's a good chance there's going to be some coughing or pauses throughout this video. But multiplayer is one of the most popular and requested features of just about any game. Regardless of genre, design, or platform, if your game doesn't have multiplayer, people are going to request it. And there are several good reasons why. The first one is that multiplayer will always extend the lifespan of a video game. You can get around not needing the most advanced AIs or the advanced AI player when you have friends that you can play against. It's why competitive multiplayer is such a very popular theme, and of course very popular recently with PUBG and the like. And this allows you to do a lot more with less in that regard. Instead of having to design unique opponents or build multiple arenas and such like that, as long as you have the players essentially providing the competition, it can keep things going for a very long time, and puts less strain on you to develop new content. When I spoke with Ramin about creating effective multiplayer games or free-to-play games, he talked about one of the importance, or one of the ideas he felt was important, was allowing the community itself to essentially create the content. And when it comes to multiplayer, the people who are playing against each other, they are creating the matches. They're the ones who are creating rivalries and huge competitions and the like. And it's also one of the major allures for competitive-based games, esports, and so on. Now, when it comes to a cooperative-based experience, multiplayer is a great way to allow friends to work together, and it creates a very effective game that people can keep coming back to. Again, titles like Payday 2, Left 4 Dead, Monster Hunter, and so on. So it's not just about a competitive aspect, but cooperative can work as well. And we've seen some cases of games going above and beyond with some unique options that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But with that said, multiplayer is not some magical cure-all that will make your game a 10 out of 10 Game of the Year winner. And there are some very important things to keep in mind, both when you're transitioning from single to multi and vice versa, and from what it means to set up a long-lasting multiplayer experience. So the first part I want to talk about are the two modes. One of the biggest or easiest ways you can sync a game is by assuming that multiplayer is the same as single, and vice versa in terms of balance. It's never a one-to-one thing. And one of the problems I see with a lot of developers who get into multiplayer-based games for the first time is making that assumption that just because something works when you have 4 people on your team means that it works if you're playing it by yourself. And that never happens. And it's very important to understand the use of scaling, or providing a different experience based on the number of players who are currently participating in a game. And a really good example of this from a few years ago, was the game Forced by Beta Dwarf. In the game, it combined ARPG, puzzle, and cooperative. I'm not even sure how I would describe it, like passing this magical orb around. And the orb itself would trigger different pylons or structures, and was also used for puzzle solving. It was essentially the game's core mechanic for how players would cooperate with each other. And that sounds all well and good, except for one problem. The game was not balanced around the fact that one person may be playing. And the orb mechanic doesn't work, because it requires you to essentially pass the ball to the closest player. And then the ball can kind of be passed and then recalled and, kind of like that. But when there's just one person, you can't do that. Which means that any kind of advanced mechanics, such as sending a ball to hit a switch while you're moving to another switch, doesn't work. Getting to multiple pylons to activate them doesn't work. And even puzzles that require you to carefully maneuver the orb around obstacles, you can't do that with one person. And it made the single player of Force pretty much unplayable. Sorry about this. And I believe developers did release a patch later on to try and add more single-player options. But the point is, there's just no way to play this game straight up from multiplayer to single. And as an even bigger point, and this is one that I see a lot of developers kind of make this mistake a lot, and that is designing enemies or situations explicitly for multiplayer, but offering no consideration for single player. One of the enemy types in Force was a suicidal bomber guy that when he dies, he does damage and AoE around him. But the problem is, if you're playing by yourself and you didn't take the ranged weapon, there's no way to fight these guys without taking damage. And that is a serious design flaw right there. Another point is from the game Full Metal Furies, in that you can play as 4 different characters, but the sniper basically requires someone else on the field to basically be the decoy or tank that damage due to her low rate of fire. So if you're playing that single player and she's the only character on the field, you're in for a world of hurt. But again, you have to be careful when deciding just what you're going to change from single to multi and vice versa. Now, as I said a few minutes ago, multiplayer is kind of, or it has been used as a way to downplay the need for advanced AI partners. But if you're going to offer a single player mode and have AI there, they need to have, some measure of intelligence. They need to know, not to walk in front of grenades or step out while people are shooting them. And this is very important in just about any team-based game. Now, the problem, though, is that you can go too far and design an AI that's so good that you have no reason to take human players, but that's a topic too big for today. Now, when it comes to the single-player side, or going from single to multi, you want to make sure that things change. Excuse me. And it's typically a good idea when it comes to balancing situations to start with one player and then work your way up, instead of focusing on multiplayer. Because one of the biggest points is that you cannot assume that there will always be players interacting with your game. You may want people to be playing your game 5-10 years from now, but there are a lot of factors that go into that, and more that we could probably spend another video discussing. But another thing that I see that can go wrong is when developers explicitly balance their game around having at least 2 or more players on the field at one time, but you then have that balance stacked against you when playing single player. We played this, it's like this Kung Fu beat-em up a few months ago where the screen was just completely filled with enemies, and it seemed like the whole game was designed around having 2 players at all times. But when you're just playing by yourself, it becomes infinitely harder. And this is why it's great to have that kind of scale, so that when you're playing a single player, you have a baseline experience here, 2 players goes up, 3, and so on. If you really want to get crazy, you can design completely different game options based on single or multiplayer groups. In Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light, the game completely changed its puzzles around based on if you were playing the game with one person or with a friend. And this was a really great idea, but it's also one that has a lot more work. Because you're essentially saying, I'm building 2 different video games at the same time, and some people may never ever see one or the other. Now, the other point I want to touch on when it comes to the importance or considerations of multiplayer is having the architecture to support that. Now, like I said a minute ago, there's a lot more to go into here, but for today's topic, when it comes to building multiplayer, you have to be really careful about making it as easy as possible for people to get together and play. In a critical thought we did about, I think, a year or so ago, we talked about the different kinds of multiplayer architectures. I think it was like client-host, TCP/IP or Direct Connect, servers, and so on. And if you want people to play your game and get it easily set up, you want to set up like either servers or allow people to start their own servers in the process. One thing that you don't want to do is require a lot of hoops to jump through. And this is one of the issues I think Full Metal Furies is running into, is that the game does not have a dedicated online architecture. The only way to play co-op with someone is that you have to already know who they are, and you have to directly connect to them on Steam, as opposed to just having a quick join or a random lobby or stuff like that. And that right there is a major blow against trying to build a multiplayer community. Because the harder you make multiplayer, the harder it's going to be for people to try and get into it. I also saw issues like that in another multiplayer game I played. I think it was called 9 Parchments. I can double check that really fast. But that was a game that it was designed to be similar to Magica. And again, 9 Parchments. And people were complaining that it was hard to get groups and get games set up in that. But that's another big point. And again, we may expand on this in another talk. But when it comes to building a multiplayer community, you have to be supportive of all your player base, include from the casual to the hardcore. Now, of course, the more addicted someone is to your game, the less likely they're going to quit. But if you don't keep people invested and keep them wanting to come back, you're never going to have a stable community. And one of the worst things that can happen to a game where multiplayer is the focus is that you have only one group of people, typically the hardcore, staying around, and there's no new or mid-tier players to basically invite new players in. We saw this issue with Evolve during its second revival and stuff like that, where everyone new came in and was being completely destroyed by all the extra players. You can also see this in multiplayer PvP only games that are just catering to the hardcore, where you can start a new game because you're too low level, but you can't get higher up because there's no one to play with to rise up. So you're kind of in that weird holding pattern that I talked about with a game I played on PSN of, I think it was last year as well. But again, the point is, multiplayer, it takes a lot of work. And the games that do it right, not only do they have to go all in, but they have to make sure that all their bases are covered. That includes, again, the different communities, as well as single versus multiplayer experience. And that's why it's a very big deal to add either to your game. If you're going to be a strictly multiplayer-based game, then you got to advertise the hell out of that and make sure your game is accessible to everyone. If your game is going to be a single-player focused game, then it's got to be balanced around that first and foremost, and then the multiplayer is built on top of that instead of vice versa. So, before we wrap things up for today, and again, there's a lot more we can talk about. For those of you watching this, are there games that were ruined in your experience due to either adding a single-player only option or multiplayer one? And can you think of games that have done a great job of balancing the two, allowing someone to immediately play multiplayer or play single player and still make progress? Again, this is why scaling is such a great idea, because it allows you to kind of almost naturally fix this issue of balance. Because you can say you want more people to play, yeah, we'll make the game more rewarding, but we'll also make it harder. But you can still progress as one person. And it gets around, again, the fact of needing to design an AI partner or AI situations. But, like we've said before, though, there are some games where this doesn't work. Going back to Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light, there is no way in hell you could design an AI partner that would help you solve those puzzles without just designing a AI that will just do it all for you. The same goes for Portal 2's co-op campaign. And again, it's very important to fill people in on what kind of connection you're going to need, what kind of gameplay is going to be required, and having that architecture to back it up. But with that said, thanks so much for watching today's Critical Thought. Be sure to check back for daily discussions on game design here, and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And let me know you have a topic for a future video. But until next time, have a good night. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/gwbicer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.